All right, so my story begins when it was about 2 summers ago, and the sun was setting, and my TV crew and I were racing to actually beat the sunset in order to film the final scene of on the last day of a week-long shoot for a TV series I used to produce in my previous life for BYU TV called The Generations Project. And for those of you who don't know what it is, it's a TV series where it's a reality TV series. We find somebody who has a, bless you, a pressing life question or issue that they want to deal with, and they want to find answers through their ancestors and genealogy, and we help them do that. We set up this whole journey for them to go on, and then we document this journey of discovery and change. And so the person that we were helping that week, his name was Kerry, and he's an African-American engineer on the Golden Gate Bridge. He was raised his whole life in San Francisco, and he's this big, huge teddy bear of a man. And when he was 13, his mother actually had been murdered. And because of that, he grew up never really understanding her life previous to that or anything, didn't know anything about her genealogy and her ancestors. And he really wanted to sort of close that gap in his life and learn about who she was and who her people were so he could know who his people are. And so we helped him do that. We had spent that entire week filming, took him all the way back to Alabama and Louisiana, all the way back to his great-grandparents named Richmond and Millie, who were actually slaves, and we found their slave records and helped him sort of learn the story of their emancipation, and actually took him to the land where they were, the plantation where they were emancipated, slaves, then emancipated, and then actually ended up working that same land as sharecroppers. And he learned about what life was like for them as sharecroppers, and then for the next generation, he even got to empathize with them by getting a mule behind a mule and plowing a field in the hot Louisiana sun, for which I felt really bad, actually, as a producer, but he wanted to do it, so it was good TV. So... And so we moved the story forward, and he learned all about his mother and her upbringing in northern Louisiana, and found out actually for the first time that she was actually a young teenage bride, and she married an older man who turned out to be a very jealous and then violent and alcoholic man, and so in order to escape this violent relationship, she actually fled one night, changed her name to Bessie, moved to another part of Louisiana, and then eventually hopped on a train that was a recruitment train that was passing through the southern states, picking up mostly African Americans to go work in the shipyards of San Francisco during World War II. And so there she got off the train and became sort of a Rosie the Riveter and helped build ships to go into the Pacific Theater for World War II for the United States. And then afterwards, she took her savings and invested in a nightclub and became sort of this known woman in town that booked these really cool African-American groups for this nightclub, and also she purchased real estate and was just a successful entrepreneur, and then also went on to be the civil rights activist in San Francisco. And so we had taken him on this whole journey to learn all about the life of his mother and their ancestors, and we were pulling into this parking lot at the Golden Gate Park to have the sun setting behind him with the Golden Gate Bridge behind him, giving his final feelings about this amazing journey he'd been on all this week, and we were racing to get all of our equipment out of our cars and get over to the location. And as we're searching for all of our equipment, we realized that, to our shock and horror, the case containing the discs that contained the entire story of this whole week-long journey we've been on were gone. Nowhere to be found. None of our cars. We had no idea where it was. So we moved into sort of measured panic mode and sent off the crew down the hill to shoot the final scene and react to an episode that may or may not now exist. And I hopped back in our minivan and flew across San Francisco, over the hills of San Francisco, back to our last location where we had been filming, which was actually in this alleyway downtown San Francisco, where actually we filmed his cousin tell Kerry for the first time about how he was actually an eyewitness at the murder of his mother, and he described this experience of this man who turned out to be this sort of scorned lover who she had rejected his advances, and so he came one day while his cousin was out fixing the car in the alleyway outside of this apartment building that she owned, and asked where she was. He motioned him inside, and he disappeared inside the door, and before he knew it, he heard this loud pop. The man came out, and he said, "What have you done?" And he said, "I just shot Bessie." And he walked away. And his cousin walked in the building, and found his aunt lying on the floor and with this little red dot, he said, right above her heart, and she was gasping for air, and so he didn't know what to do. He was 17 at the time, and she said, "I can't breathe." So he picked her up and dragged her outside onto the sidewalk, and so she could breathe the fresh air, and waited for the ambulance to come. And of course, sadly, she died a couple hours later at the hospital. So this was the location where we had just filmed, and so I pull up with my minivan and jump out, searching frantically for this little black case, nowhere to be found in this little alley. And so I go ask this group of what sort of looked like locals, sort of local neighborhood locals, and you know what I'm saying. And one of the guys was it was a diverse, interesting crowd. Just to paint a picture, like this one guy was sharpening what appeared to be this homemade machete on the sidewalk, just slowly back and forth, scraping away. But they were nice, and so I was like panicking and saying, "Yeah, did you see us? We were filming this black case, and have you seen it?" "No, sorry, man, we don't know anything. Sorry." And they said, "But you should check down the alleyway. Like, there's these two guys these homeless guys who sort of hang out down there, and maybe they've seen it, maybe they know." And I was like, "Okay, thank you so much." And I turn to walk away, and one of them stops me. He's like, "Well, you should know. Actually, you should know. Be careful with Nigel. He's kind of schizophrenic, and he doesn't take any meds, and because he's homeless, and he's sort of an alcoholic, and so if he feels threatened, he'll cut you." I was like, "Oh, okay. Thank you. So which one is Nigel?" And they're like, "Oh, you'll know him. You'll smell him. He's an alcoholic, and he smells like alcohol." I was like, "Great. I don't have a sense of smell, so okay." So I proceed down the alleyway, and I'm thinking to myself, like, okay, I mean, not to be a jerk, but I mean, is this really worth it? I mean, I don't want to be cut. And so, as I'm thinking, like, is this worth it? I'm sort of weighing it out in my mind. And because frankly, before I started producing this series, to be honest, I never really quite kind of got what all the fuss was about with genealogy and family history and its names. And okay, my mom was great at it, But then producing this series, I actually got to see firsthand how this interaction between our identities and sort of placing our identities in this longer narrative of this family history and where it's coming from, and then sort of where our future can take it, it just changed people's lives in an instant, literally in front of my eyes. And so, sort of armed with that sense of conviction that this is indeed worth it, I proceeded down the alley and then approached the first guy that I sort of, bless you, determined was probably a homeless guy. And because he had a shopping cart, and he was sitting on the ground, and he had about 6 layers of clothing on, and just look a little disheveled. Anyway, so approached him, and then our eyes finally met. He looked up, and our eyes met, and I'm, again, trying to be non-threatening. I don't want to be cut, so non-threateningly sort of smile, and I'm about to say something, and he burst into seriously the most violent form of jumping jacks I've ever seen, and began to spew all these words, and sort of was on heated argument with something in front of him. And so I just guessed that this was Nigel, and chose to leave him and keep going down the alley there's apparently a second guy down there. So I make my way down the alley, and I do come upon another guy who had his shopping cart that had a sort of a tarp over it, and he had a sort of a pile of bedding next to him, some sheets and pillows, and figured he's probably the homeless guy. And so I approach him, again, non-threateningly, because I don't know who's Nigel, and I just don't want to be cut. So I approach him gently, non-threateningly. I don't want to be patronizing, but still, anyway, so it's awkward. And I approach him, and I'm like, "So, I don't know if you've seen this black case, and it contains some things of mine, and we left it behind." And he wouldn't really make eye contact, and he just sort of shrugged his shoulders and was like, "Oh, I don't know." That was it, literally. And so sort of monosyllabic grunts and moans. And so I was like, "Okay, well, do you mind if I just sort of peek underneath your tarp? And I know it's your business, it's your property, but just pull back. And so I'm just sort of, gently pulling back the tarp, and he's like, well, I don't know. I'm like, it's cool. And I pull it back, and I see in the shopping cart actually was this amazing collection of like old fax machines and business phones and all these electronic goods. Like he found his niche. And amongst these electronics, I saw like our electronics, our walkie-talkies and some batteries and chargers. I was like, sweet, like, hey. That looks like, that's like ours. Like, that's cool. Again, not threatening. It's all good. And he's like, I don't know. And again, but my priority was like, okay, I can live without the walkies. I have to find those discs, the case. And so I'm like, so those were actually in a black case. Not accusing, not just, did you happen to see the case those came in? He's like, I don't know. And he wouldn't look at me. And so I look over at the pile of bedding, and I'm like, maybe, again, there was no communication. So I don't know, I feel sort of stupid to this day for this, but I was like, so if you don't mind, I'm just gonna, and I reach over my toe. I didn't want to invade his space. I think that's what it was about. Like, I didn't want to get down up in his grill. Like, I'm just gonna reach out with my toe and brush it aside. and I was like, and there it was. I was like, sweet, that's it. And he's like, and he looks down, looks at the case, looks up at me, looks at the case, and I'm like smiling, this is good. And all of a sudden he just sits straight up, totally became a totally different human being. He's like, now that's gonna cost you. And I was like, fair enough, sir. That's totally cool. He's like, now what kind of fool would leave a case like that laying around in an alley like this? And he was like, lectured me. As I'm like, and I'm pulling stuff out of the case, out of the shopping cart into my case. Like, you are so totally right. I was like, thank you for babysitting it, man. You've done me the biggest favor. You're the bomb. It's awesome. He's like, that's going to cost you, and that's going to cost you as I'm putting my stuff back in the case. I'm like, you are right, I don't care. And I get all my stuff in the case, and I just pull out my wallet with all the petty cash in it, and I was like, I'm not going to insult him by counting the cash, even though I kind of wanted to. I had no idea how much I was about to give this man. Pull it out, and I'm like, here you go, like, thank you so much. But he counted it out, because it was like, as if it's not going to be enough. So he's counted it out. It was $150, that's pretty good. And I was like, okay, not bad. It's not like $500. So I carted away, and as he continues to lecture me the whole way down, I pass Nigel, who's still doing the jumping jacks, back to the mouth of the alleyway, put the stuff in the car, and book it back over to the other side of San Francisco to the Golden Gate Park Bridge. And as I'm approaching, and I get out of the car, and they're all just standing there waiting, with bated breath to find out what happened. And, as my eyes meet Carrie's, and I'm able to say, I found the case. And if there was any lingering doubt literally within my mind whether that was worth it to supposedly risk my life running into Nigel for this case, any lingering doubt was totally erased when our eyes met. Man, I'm emotional this week anyways. And he just sort of burst into both laughter and tears at the same time. Came over and gave me this most bone-crushing hug and thanked me for it. And just, for me, confirmed the quote from Miss Dolly Parton that laughter through tears is my favorite emotion, and it's true. So thank you very much.
Kendall Wilcox, everybody. He's a good man.